What if the name ERIKA KIRK is connected to one of the most disturbing conspiracy theories the internet has ever seen, and almost no one noticed? Because online investigators are now claiming there are uncomfortable overlaps that are raising serious questions. Not proof, not convictions, but patterns that some say are impossible to ignore. It starts with resurfaced clips, old associations, and oddly timed statements that critics believe echo themes tied to Pizzagate-related narratives: power, secrecy, children, silence, and elite protection. Again, these are claims being made online, not confirmed facts. But once people began connecting the dots, the internet spiraled fast. Screenshots started circulating. Old interviews were reanalyzed. Comments once ignored are now being read differently. And suddenly, people are asking why certain questions were never followed up, why specific topics were shut down quickly, and why anyone who pushed back allegedly faced pressure to stay quiet. To be clear, no crimes have been proven, and no official links exist. But in the world of online investigations, perception matters. And the questions alone are enough to shake trust. So, is this just another internet conspiracy reaching too far? Or are there connections hiding in plain sight that were never meant to be examined? Because once these questions surface, they don't disappear. Before we go any further, one thing has to be made absolutely clear. There is no proven evidence, no charges, and no official findings linking ERIKA KIRK to Pizzagate or any criminal activity. What follows is a breakdown of online claims, internet speculation, and patterns people are debating, not statements of fact. This story exists because the internet is asking questions, not because answers have been confirmed. Now, with that said, here's where the controversy begins. For years, the name ERIKA KIRK barely registered outside of specific political and activist circles. To supporters, she was a behind-the-scenes figure. To critics, she was someone with unusual influence, but very little public scrutiny. That changed when online researchers, some serious, some reckless, began revisiting old clips, archived content, and digital footprints that many believe deserve a second look. And once those archives resurfaced, the internet did what it always does. It connected dots. The first spark came from old appearances and statements that critics say contained language and themes eerily similar to rhetoric often associated with elite protection scandals, secrecy, misunderstood narratives, and warnings against asking the wrong questions. Again, none of this proves wrongdoing, but for conspiracy-focused communities, it was enough to reopen discussion. People began asking, why were certain topics shut down so aggressively? Why were some questions framed as dangerous instead of simply false? And why did critics claim they were pressured into silence rather than debated openly? These questions alone were enough to trigger comparisons to Pizzagate, a debunked conspiracy theory that nonetheless continues to exist online due to lingering distrust of institutions, media, and political elites. To be clear, Pizzagate itself has been repeatedly debunked by law enforcement and journalists. No evidence of an organized child trafficking ring tied to political figures was ever found. But the theory survives not because of proof, either because of mistrust, censorship, fears, and the internet's refusal to let go of unanswered questions. And that's exactly where ERIKA KIRK's name entered the conversation. Online critics began highlighting overlaps in social circles, not illegal activity, shared events, mutual acquaintances, appearances in spaces where power, money, and politics intersect. On their own, these connections mean nothing. In elite circles, overlap is common. But conspiracy communities argue that repeated proximity combined with guarded responses creates suspicion. One resurfaced clip in particular gained traction. In it, ERIKA is seen discussing the danger of internet misinformation and the responsibility of parents and institutions to control narratives involving children. Supporters say the clip shows concern for safety. Critics argue the wording felt rehearsed and defensive. Once again, interpretation, not evidence. Then came the screenshots. Old tweets, archived posts, comment replies that were never meant to be revisited years later. Some showed frustration with conspiracy thinkers. Others hinted at private conversations happening behind closed doors. None of it was criminal. None of it was illegal. But in the world of online speculation, tone matters as much as facts. And the tone raised eyebrows as interest grew. So did accusations of information suppression. Critics claimed videos discussing ERIKA KIRK were taken down. Comment sections allegedly locked. Accounts reported or shadow banned. Whether this was coordinated action or routine moderation remains unclear. But perception fueled the fire. Because to conspiracy-minded audiences, censorship doesn't signal safety, it signals fear. Suddenly, ERIKA's name was being mentioned in the same breath as Pizzagate, not because of proven links, but because the response to criticism mirrored patterns they had seen before. Deny, dismiss, deplatform, move on. And that's where the controversy truly exploded. Supporters pushed back hard, calling the entire narrative irresponsible, dangerous, and defamatory. They pointed out correctly that none of the claims were backed by law enforcement, courts, or credible investigations. They accused critics of exploiting a debunked conspiracy theory to smear someone they disliked politically, and that criticism is valid. But critics countered with a different argument. This isn't about believing Pizzagate. It's about asking why certain conversations are treated as forbidden. That distinction, whether sincere or manipulative, kept the discussion alive. As more people joined the debate, the narrative fractured into camps. Those who believe ERIKA KIRK is being unfairly targeted by conspiracy culture. Those who believe she represents elite structures that resist transparency. And those who believe the entire discussion is a distraction from real issues. None of these groups agree. But all of them are loud. Adding fuel to the fire was the lack of direct engagement. ERIKA did not publicly address the specific allegations tying her name to Pizzagate narratives. Instead, general statements condemning misinformation were cited. To supporters, that was appropriate. To critics, it felt evasive. And in internet culture, silence is never neutral. By the end of part one thing becomes clear. This story is not about proof. It's about perception, distrust, and the long shadow cast by conspiracy theories in the digital age. ERIKA KIRK has not been charged with anything. There is no evidence tying her to crimes. But her name has become entangled in a narrative that refuses to die because it feeds on ambiguity, power dynamics, and unanswered questions. And in part 2, we're going to examine how and why Pizzagate-style narratives resurface, who benefits from keeping them alive, and whether ERIKA KIRK is being pulled into something much bigger than herself, or whether critics are intentionally dragging her name into controversy to serve another agenda entirely. To understand why ERIKA KIRK's name became tangled in Pizzagate-style narratives, you have to understand how internet conspiracies evolve. They rarely start with evidence. They start with distrust. And once distrust takes root, even neutral actions can be reinterpreted as suspicious. Pizzagate didn't survive because it was proven it survived, because millions of people already believed institutions lie. So when any public figure appears to defend gatekeeping information, promote narrative control, or criticize online investigators, conspiracy communities see that not as responsibility, but as confirmation bias. That's the environment ERIKA KIRK walked into. Online critics began framing her not as an individual, but as a symbol or representative of elite structures that decide what can and cannot be discussed. Again, this framing does not mean wrongdoing. It means perception shifted. And perception online spreads faster than facts. One of the most repeated claims involved language analysis. Internet investigators replayed old interviews and panels, focusing on specific phrases, dangerous narratives, protecting children from misinformation, responsible storytelling, and trust-established systems. Supporters heard professionalism. Critics heard coded messaging. This is how conspiracy logic works. Neutral language becomes suspicious. Caution becomes control. Silence becomes guilt. Another factor that escalated attention was association by proximity. ERIKA's critics pointed out overlaps with political donors, advocacy groups, and institutions that had previously been targeted by conspiracy movements. None of these connections were illegal or hidden. But conspiracy culture thrives on networks, not actions. If people share rooms, panels, or donors, they're assumed to share secrets. That assumption is flawed but powerful. As videos discussing these overlaps spread, they were often flagged or removed. Platforms cited misinformation policies, harassment concerns, or community guidelines. Supporters viewed this as appropriate moderation. Critics saw it as suppression, reinforcing the belief that they don't want us asking questions. This is the paradox of conspiracy culture. Debunking can actually strengthen belief. The more platforms intervened, the more the narrative hardened. ERIKA KIRK's name wasn't just mentioned anymore, it became embedded in thumbnails, titles, and hashtags designed to provoke shock. Words like exposed, connection, and hidden were used carefully, often followed by disclaimers buried deep in descriptions. Importantly, many of these creators never claimed ERIKA committed crimes. Instead, they asked leading questions, implied concern, and encouraged viewers to decide for themselves. This rhetorical tactic is common because it avoids direct accusations while still planting suspicion. Meanwhile, defenders grew increasingly frustrated. They argued that dragging a real person into a debunked conspiracy ecosystem was irresponsible and dangerous. They warned that speculation alone can cause reputational harm, threats, and harassment even without evidence, and they weren't wrong. But critics countered with another argument. If nothing is hidden, why not engage directly? That question fair or not kept resurfacing instead of detailed responses. Broader condemnations of conspiracy culture were cited. Statements emphasized the harm of misinformation and the importance of protecting children from exploitation narratives. While reasonable, those statements did little to calm conspiracy-driven audiences, who viewed them as institutional boilerplate. As a result, the story shifted again. It was no longer about ERIKA KIRK specifically. It was about who gets to define truth online. Some commentators suggested that ERIKA had become collateral damage in a larger cultural war between centralized authority and decentralized investigation. In that framing, she wasn't a villain, she was a lightning rod. Others were less charitable, suggesting her refusal to engage proved elitism or arrogance. Still, others believed the entire situation was manufactured outrage, designed to generate clicks and polarization. By this point, the facts were almost irrelevant. What mattered was momentum. Every attempt to shut the narrative down seemed to revive it. Every disclaimer was ignored. Every correction was reframed as evidence of control. This feedback loop is exactly how Pizzagate-style narratives persist. Long after they've been disproven, the danger here isn't just misinformation, it's normalization. When speculative framing becomes mainstream, it lowers the threshold for accusation. It teaches audiences that implication is enough and that evidence is optional. That's where real harm can occur, not just to ERIKA KIRK, but to anyone pulled into similar narratives. And yet, the story continues because it taps into something deeply emotional: fear for children, anger at elites, and distrust of power. Those emotions are real even if the conclusions drawn from them are not. By the end of part 2, one truth stands out: ERIKA KIRK's alleged connection to Pizzagate is not built on proof. It's built on how conspiracy culture interprets behavior, language, and silence. Whether she deserves scrutiny or sympathy depends entirely on perspective. But what's undeniable is that once the internet frames someone as part of a forbidden narrative, escaping that frame becomes nearly impossible. And in part 3, we'll look at where this leaves ERIKA KIRK now, the real-world consequences of conspiracy association, and why stories like this don't just fade away, they evolve, mutate, and resurface when trust collapses again. By the time ERIKA KIRK's name became fully entangled in those cases, And we are entangled in Pizzagate-style narratives. The damage, at least online, was already done. Not because of evidence, not because of charges, but because association alone had taken on a life of its own. And once the internet decides someone is connected to a forbidden topic, facts struggle to catch up at this stage. The conversation stopped being about ERIKA KIRK's actual actions and became about what she represents to different audiences. To supporters, she symbolizes someone unfairly targeted by conspiracy culture, dragged into a debunked narrative simply for operating within elite or institutional spaces. To critics, she represents the kind of figure who benefits from systems that discourage scrutiny and label uncomfortable questions as dangerous. Neither side is really talking to the other anymore. What's important to understand is that Pizzagate-style narratives don't need proof to survive, they need emotional fuel. Fear for children, anger at power, distrust of institutions. Once those emotions are activated, any attempt to shut the conversation down can be interpreted as confirmation that something is being hidden. This is why ERIKA's general statements condemning misinformation, while reasonable, failed to quiet critics. In conspiracy logic, denial is expected. Silence is suspicious. Engagement is a trap. There is no winning move. And that's the real danger of these narratives. They don't require someone to be guilty. They only require ambiguity. As time passed, some creators quietly softened their language. Connection became overlap. Exposure became questions. Disclaimers grew longer, but the thumbnails, titles, and emotional framing remained just as explosive. The goal wasn't clarity, it was engagement. Meanwhile, others began to move on to new targets, new names, new alleged connections. This is another hallmark of conspiracy culture. It rarely ends with answers. It just shifts focus. For ERIKA KIRK, that means her name may fade from daily conversation. But it will likely resurface whenever trust in institutions collapses again. That's how these stories work. They don't disappear. They wait out. The broader takeaway here isn't about whether ERIKA KIRK is innocent or guilty, because there is no evidence of guilt to evaluate. The real takeaway is how easily a real person can be pulled into a narrative built on implication rather than proof. In the digital age, perception is power. Algorithms reward outrage. Speculation spreads faster than corrections. And once a name is tied to a charged conspiracy, even falsely, that association can linger indefinitely. So where does that leave this story? It leaves us with unanswered questions, but not the ones conspiracy culture wants us to obsess over. The real questions are these. How do we balance skepticism with responsibility? At what point does asking questions turn into reputational harm? And who decides when speculation crosses a line? Because if we're not careful, the same systems that expose real wrongdoing can also manufacture suspicion out of thin air. ERIKA KIRK's alleged connection to Pizzagate may never amount to anything and based on available facts. It likely won't, but the controversy itself is a reminder of how powerful and how dangerous internet narratives can be when emotion replaces evidence. And once that line is crossed, the truth doesn't always matter anymore. So what do you think? Is ERIKA KIRK unfairly dragged into a narrative she had nothing to do with? Or is there something deeper that the internet is picking up on? The truth is murky, and that's exactly why this story has exploded online. Fans are divided, online investigators are digging. And every post, deleted comment, or cryptic statement adds another layer of intrigue. Now it's your turn. Scroll through clips, screenshots, and archived posts. Analyze the words, the timing, and the context. Do you see coincidences? Or do the patterns suggest something more? Could the connections online be completely innocent? Or is there a reason conspiracy-minded communities are linking her name to long-debunked theories like Pizzagate? Drop your thoughts, theories, and wildest predictions below. Because in stories like this, the internet demands answers and the truth is rarely clear-cut. Follow every update closely. Watch the conversation unfold and keep your eyes open, because one new post or revelation could shift the entire narrative overnight. The question remains: coincidence, perception, or something hidden in plain sight? You decide. You decide.